Hello, everybody. Welcome. I just wanted to say, before we get started, a few housekeeping things. We have the lovely audience data collection tech champion, Jack, on the chat today, so feel free to say hi. And we also have the lovely Maria providing live captioning for us today. So before we get started, this is going to be a 30-minute webinar, and we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. I think the presentation I'm doing lasts around 15 to 20 minutes. So closed captions are also available on the desktop and mobile Zoom app. All you have to do is click the CC button. This webinar is going to be recorded and will be available on the website alongside additional resources within the next 7 days. And yeah, feel free to say hello in the chat. Just select everyone from the drop down and feel free to use the Q&A button to ask questions, and use those react buttons if you'd like to as well. So my name is Roberta Beattie, and I'm the Digital Accessibility Tech Champion for the Digital Culture Network. I'm going to self-describe for those of you who might find that useful. I'm a white female, I have bleached blonde hair, and I'm wearing a stripy cardigan and bright red lipstick. Today we're going to be talking about digital accessibility and why it's so important. So on the agenda today, we're going to be covering what digital accessibility is and a little bit about the landscape and legislation. Not too heavy, I hope. Then we'll find out about accessibility audits, and I'll be covering what an accessibility statement is as well, just so that you have a broad understanding of the sorts of things that I can do with you. Then we'll have some time for Q&A. So get asking questions if you want to in the Q&A. And lastly, I'll cover the next steps that you can take to access our support. So what is digital accessibility? The goal of digital accessibility is to remove the barriers that prevent anybody from being able to understand or interact with your digital content. It's very straightforward. I thought it would also be interesting to share this statistic. The latest estimates from the Department for Work and Pensions Family Resources Survey indicated that 16 million people in the UK had a disability in the 2021-2022 financial year. Now, this represents nearly a quarter of the population. And that means a lot of people could be experiencing some kind of barriers or difficulties when accessing digital content if it's not been created accessibly. Digital content can take a lot of different forms. It can include things like your website, how it looks on a mobile or on a computer. It can be things like your video content, your online training or webinars like this one, your digital downloads and resources, your ticket booking process, and everything else right through to the way that your online forms work. And there's plenty of other things that I haven't included, like social media and newsletters as well. But this is just to get an idea. It feels like there's a lot of different formats to cover, but really a simple way to break it down is to think about modes and barriers. Modes are things like permanent accessibility considerations that don't get better or eventually go away. Then there's temporary accessibility considerations that last for a finite period of time. Examples of this can include a broken arm or tiredness. And then there's situational accessibility considerations that are due to the situation that you find yourself in. And these can be things like slow internet, screen glare, or noisy room, that type of thing. And accessibility barriers could be encountered if people don't have the full use of one or a combination of their senses. This is why it's important to make sure that your content is available to a variety of them, so people can choose different ways to access the content that suits them. And it really helps towards preventing accessibility barriers. And the barrier categories can be cognitive, anything relating to the brain and processing of information; visual, anything relating to sight; auditory, anything relating to hearing; motor, anything relating to the physical body or movement; and speech, anything relating to the function of speaking. Now, I thought I'd give you a very high-level overview of the accessibility standards ecosystem, because there are quite a lot of confusing acronyms that can be battered around, and it's really helpful to be able to understand how they all fit together and what they mean. So basically, we start off with the overarching World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C. And this is the overarching organization that is focused on a huge range of web standards, not just web accessibility. Then we've got the WAI, and that stands for Web Accessibility Initiative. And this is a team that sits within the W3C, and they focus specifically on web accessibility. And that team, they're the people who have worked on the Web Content WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to provide specific recommendations on making web content accessible. And the WCAG, or Web Content Guidelines, they're an internationally recognized standard for accessibility across the globe. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines were first published in 1999, and the latest revision is 2.2. And they are formed of 4 overarching principles, 13 guidelines, and 86 success criteria that can be 3 different levels of merit. And you can use those 86 success criteria to gauge the accessibility or check your accessibility of your content. So I'll start off with the principles, and they are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Those are the 4 principles that sit at the top of everything. Perceivable, this means that users must be able to access the information being presented to them with one or more of their senses. A good way to think of this is, if you can't see it, can you hear it? Or vice versa. And an example of this would be to provide alternative text descriptions for any images that you put on your content, so that screen readers can read them out. Operable, this means that users must be able to navigate and use and interact with your content. For example, making sure that the content that you put up there is also accessible via a keyboard if people can't use a mouse. Understandable, and this means making sure that people can understand and take actions that you want them to take. Think user journeys, simple language, clear signposting, and that kind of thing. And robust, and this means that content must be robust enough so that it can be interpreted by a wide variety of devices, such as mobiles, tablets, computers, that type of thing, and also compatible with assistive technologies like keyboards and screen readers and head switches. And underneath those overarching principles, there are 13 guidelines, as I mentioned. For example, 4 of the 13 guidelines that sit under the perceivable principle are text alternatives, time-based media, adaptable, and distinguishable. And that's everything that's included in the perceivable overarching principle. And the success criteria of each guideline within that overarching principle can be a level of A, AA, or AAA. A is the bare minimum and AAA is the highest level. Legislation around accessibility states that the level AA is usually the standard that you should aim to achieve. Now, I'm not going to go into what each of these means, but this is just an example of the adaptable guideline success criteria that sits under that perceivable principle. And as you can see in this case, there are 6 success criteria of various levels of A, AA, and AAA. So that gives you an idea of what can be inside a particular guideline. And if you wanted to make your content AA accessible, you would also have to make sure that it covered all of the guideline, all the success criteria in A as well. And the same for if you wanted to make your content AAA accessible, you'd have to make sure you covered all of the success criteria in this adaptable principle. So to recap, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are 4 overarching principles, 13 guidelines, and then inside those guidelines, there are 86 success criteria that can be 3 different levels. You can think of those 86 things as a big checklist to go through and test your content against to see if it passes or not. They're all the things that Web Accessibility Initiative have identified as things that can help prevent people experiencing issues and barriers around web content accessibility and usability. Hopefully now you've got a brief understanding of digital accessibility and what accessibility standards are and what they mean. I'm always on hand to ask for help or advice about this. So if you need to write these requirements into a web brief or include these things in your accessibility statement, you can always reach out to me for one-to-one support and advice, and I'll happily help you through the process. And it's worth noting that even these guidelines aren't perfect. So whilst they're there to help us address some common barriers that people can experience when you're accessing digital content, there's definitely no perfect silver bullet. Think of digital accessibility as being an ongoing process where you experiment, learn, and then apply what you've learned. And it really is a journey of progress over perfection. You don't need to get it all right at once. So moving on, we're now going to cover what accessibility audits are. An accessibility audit is a series of checks, like the success criteria I just showed you, that you can perform on your content to see if there are any barriers stopping people from being able to use or interact with your content. And they're really brilliant for finding opportunities to make improvements. I think it's worth regularly scheduling time to audit for accessibility, as it really is an ongoing process, like I mentioned before. And you can get a professional audit from an agency, or you can perform a self-evaluation, and I can help you with that. And the process of an audit typically includes a manual review where you check it with a keyboard and see if there's any glaring mistakes that you could spot yourself just by using the site and thinking about the content and the journey through that content. And then there's automated checks you can do with tools, and accessibility checking tools. And then you can gather user feedback and collect all of that information and put it into a prioritized list, and then you can start making those changes. And that includes updating your accessibility statement as well when you've done that work. But if you'd like to have any help with that, you can book a one-to-one with me, and I'll explain how you can get in touch later. Moving on to what are accessibility statements. An accessibility statement provides people with information about how they can access your content. A well-written accessibility statement can be an important resource, and many people with disabilities look for that resource when visiting a website for the first time. In the image I've used on this slide here, it's a screenshot from the All-In Access scheme, and it's a great project that the Arts Council are working on at the moment to improve the access to arts and culture. And you can use that for inspiration. So what information should you include in your accessibility statement? Your accessibility statement should give an overview and talk about the work you've done to make your content accessible. It should also state the accessibility standard that we were talking about earlier, that you're striving to achieve or meet. And you can also include any issues that you found during your assessments and offer an alternative method for accessing that content. Sometimes you won't have the budget to fix it, or it won't be in the roadmap to do it at the moment. And you can also provide people with a point of contact. So if they're really struggling, they can reach out to you and you can help them. This is also another really brilliant way to gain useful feedback over time, as that makes people feel considered and included. Again, if you'd like me to any support from me around your accessibility statement, then you can book a one-to-one with me for some advice. And here are the ways you can do that. You can send an email to digitalnetwork@artscouncil.uk and ask for my support, or you can head on over to our website, digitalculturenetwork.org.uk, and head to the Ask a Tech Champion page and fill out the form there. And now we've got time for some Q&A, if there have been any.
Hey, Roberta, thank you so much for that. I'm sure a lot of people here will find that to be a really useful introduction to the topic. Please do post your questions in the Q&A. We've currently only got one, so if you do have any burning questions for Roberta, pop them in. We've got a question from Tasmin here. What are some tools that we could use to do automated checks for digital accessibility?
There's some really good ones, actually. There's one from Google, and it's called Google Lighthouse, and you can use it as a plugin on your browser, and you can set different things for it to check. Or there's one by WebAIM as well, and I'll post out these links with the resources. And the WebAIM tool's really clever, actually, because it's another browser extension, so it goes at the top of the browser, and you can visit the website that you want to check, and you can click on the button, and it basically shows any issues that it can detect live on the screen, and you can click on them for further detail and drill down into things like the code or what that problem might be. So it'll give you an explanation of everything. They're very clever tools, and I'll share them after the webinar.
Thanks, Roberta. Yeah, people are saying the links would be really helpful. So obviously a lot of interest there.
Fantastic.
So we've got a question from, sorry, they're moving so quickly. They're all coming in now.
Excellent.
Got a question here. Are there standard examples of alternative text for Twitter posts that contain images? Any good resources on alternative text?
Actually, I came across a really good article that was around alternative text the other day, which I will share in the resources. If you imagine images, everyone's got information visually available to them. If you imagine why you use that image, you can control. You could use the description to describe the emotional value of it. You can be factual and describe what's actually in that image. I've seen a lot of people add them to the actual text of the post as well, so it's in context with what they're saying. And I think the really important thing is, if you're using text over images, make sure that you include that text, because it's just not it's not available to people with visual impairments.
Amazing. I'm turning my camera on as well, by the way, because we've had comments in the chat about being able to sort of see the speaker, which is obviously So considerations around digital accessibility here today as well. A question here, if I want to see how our website reads with a screen reader, which should we use? They want to check out how it works, and especially with alt text again.
It's a good question. There are a couple out there that you could try. I always recommend NVDA though, because it's free. There's another one called JAWS, and you will pay for that, and it can be quite expensive if you're not a regular user of screen readers. But NVDA definitely will cover everything you need to know about screen readers and how they react to your content.
Will that work for PDFs as well? A couple of other questions around that.
Yeah, so the way a screen reader works, it's not just around websites, it's about navigating your entire computer. So it should work when reviewing PDFs as well.
Excellent, amazing. So this is a common one we get, I think, across the board. So Damien Passmore here says, I work with a lot of small voluntary-led organizations who aren't always that tech savvy. What advice or tools can we offer to people for whom digital is already very daunting?
Yeah, it's I've actually done a really I've created a webinar around an introduction to digital accessibility, and it doesn't have to be very technical. It can be really basic things that you can put in a checklist for people to go over, and it'll be things like using concise, simple language. So instead of saying in the event of, you can just say if, for example. So it's about the way that you're phrasing and your content and the words that you use. You can be thinking about color contrast that you're using as well, and there's a really cool tool that I can share with you for that. But all of this stuff is really doable for people that are quite daunted already, but they don't need any technical know-how, as it were. And also, when you're putting text on a website, think about the breaking it up into smaller chunks, because if you increase the amount of paragraph spaces, this can make text a lot more readable. So there's some really simple things, but the webinar's got lots of tips and things like that that you could use to get yourself a checklist together, or just get in touch with me and I can help you make a checklist that's suitable for the people that you're thinking of sharing it with.
Great. There's one here that's quite really interesting from Cornelia. What's the advice on alt text for images that are purely illustrative? So they're not the point of the media post, they're just there for decoration. What would you do in that circumstance?
Yeah, so if an image is decorative, it really doesn't consist of any value for someone with a screen reader. And what you can do is you can include an alt tag on your image, but you can leave that alt tag with no text inside it. And the reason that you would do that is because screen readers will, if an image doesn't have an alt tag associated with it, what it will usually do is read out the file name of that image, which is really confusing for some people, and it can take a lot of time, and it can be a lot of garbled text, basically. So if you include that blank alt tag, you're going to be allowing people to skip over that image without having to go through lots of gobbledygook. And essentially what you're doing is marking it as decorative to screen readers who can just skip over it.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any tools? It's just moved. Are there any, so this is quite an interesting one. Are there any tools to make content more accessible for people who are suffering from cognitive impairments?
I haven't seen any tools specifically. There's a tool called Funkify that can emulate certain things so you can experience it. But really with all of your content, you should be thinking about trying to engage something called critical friends or user feedback. So critical friends would be people with a wide range and variety of who have lived experience of different things, and they can give you some really valuable feedback on ways to make your content more accessible. And it's about thinking about whether that what the point of that content is, what the aims and objectives are for it as well, and making sure that people can sort of understand what you mean by that content and what you intend for them to do with it.
Thanks, Roberta. Yeah, and I think there's been quite a few conversations in the chat throughout about kind of definitions of disability, sort of medical models of disability versus more inclusive models.
And I would always rotate to thinking about it in terms of senses. What senses are you making your content available to? It really doesn't. Modes of disability or actual disabilities should fit into all of the sensory categories. So you're not having to get specific about what type of disability you're trying to cater to. You're thinking about content in terms of your senses.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it's a challenging area, and obviously we're just, it's a work in progress to get the language exactly right, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
There's one here, and we've got kind of the same question for WordPress and for Wix. Are there any kind of good tools that you know of, any good tools and resources on those platforms that are kind of just really simple and easy to get started with? For
accessibility, not that I know of. I mean, there are things like Grammarly and other things you can check for simple language and stuff like that. But I would just say to make sure that you're covering the bases of simple language, easy to use, easy to read fonts, breaking your text apart, that type of thing, and then actually checking your content with the Lighthouse tool and the WebAIM tool as well, because those can really point out some really good opportunities to fix things. And if you're thinking about whether the theme that you've chosen for Wix or for what your WordPress site is accessible, or you're at that point of designing your website, feel free to get in touch with me and I can help you find one that would be appropriate for you to use.
Brilliant. And so we are running towards the end now. I think maybe this might be our last question. Do you have any examples of websites or social media accounts that, so one of our questioners here, Kemi, has sort of said there's a rated AAA, or maybe that you think are just fantastic examples that people could look at?
Yeah, definitely. The allin.access website that I mentioned in the accessibility statement example, that's been built to a very high standard. So it's a really good one to have a look at and see what they're doing. They've also got social media accounts that you can follow. So they're going to be trying to follow better practices and pursue the things that make the content accessible. So I'd say that they should be a good one to follow and to keep up with. And I'll see what else I can share in the resources when this webinar goes out.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Roberta. And obviously it goes without saying that you can always get in touch with us, book in a case, and we can kind of address more specific issues. Thanks so much.
Thank you ever so much for coming, everyone. Yeah, like Jack said, feel free to reach out to us for support. There's 12 of us tech champions that are free to access for you. And you can do that via digital network at artscouncil.org.uk. You can visit the website digitalculturenetwork.org.uk. This website's actually packed full of resources and previous webinars as well. We're on X, which was formerly Twitter, as ACEDCN, and we're on LinkedIn, and we also have a fabulous YouTube channel for you to check out. So thanks ever so much, everybody. It's lovely to see you here today.